Welcome back to another episode with Tanya Borowski, functional medicine practitioner and all-round brilliant women's health expert. Hopefully you'll have listened to our previous 2 episodes and the one before this, which is all around understanding in great depth the menstrual cycle and the menstrual cycle when it starts, so in teens. And in this episode, we're going to talk about really great things around what you can do to help your teen, or if you are a teen listening, how to help yourself if you have problem periods. So issues with pain, acne, heavy bleeding, etc. So we'll go straight into it.
Great. Thank you, Mel. So, we're in this session, I'm going to be covering what we would call problems that can occur with periods. So we're going to just to reiterate, we're going to cover off if you're experiencing heavy bleeding and what constitutes heavy bleeding to help you signpost that. We're also going to be talking about when is a period considered to be, or when is a menstrual cycle considered to be irregular. So we're going to cover off that. And I'm also going to be talking about PMS and mood symptoms. And then we're going to be doing a completely separate episode on the pill and also on acne. But I will be touching on acne today as well. So within that, I think the first thing that I'd like to sort of cover off, we spoke in the last episode about just allowing time for this journey to begin. There's a long road ahead, and there are going to be sort of bumps along the road, and so allowing for that to begin. So I just sort of would like to sort of start by, when might you think about consider consulting a doctor? At what point is that important? So if there are signs of puberty before the age of 8, then that is a little bit of a flag and would be worth a trip to the GP. If there is no sign of any sexual characteristics, so pubic hair, underarm hair, the breasts budding, if there's no sexual characteristic signs by the age of 14, if menarche, so menstruation, doesn't kick in within 3 years of the breast developing, and if there has been no menarche or no menstruation by sort of 16, those would be flags that you should go and speak to your GP is the first point. Mm-hmm. So if we then move on from that and we say, okay, well, the term irregular is used so much, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what actually constitutes an irregular period? And this isn't in the NICE guidelines. This isn't, again, this is very indicative of how sort of poorly women's health and menstrual cycles have been considered. But through my lens, we're talking about irregularity as if there have been 2 or more years that have passed post menarche, and we remember that menarche is the first day where all the balloons go into the sky and the rockets start when your first period starts. That's menarche. So if 2 or more years post that and cycles are consistently shorter than 21 days or longer than 45. And again, remembering that teen cycles are quite often 45 days. So we're having to wait till at least 2 years or more for that to constitute an irregular cycle. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we want to be able to understand. And then the other really important thing with that, so within that time, really important, the pill cannot regulate cycles. It suppresses ovulation. So the pill, even though it is prescribed to regulate periods still, it absolutely cannot do that. It is a complete dichotomy of terms. It absolutely can't do that. Ovulation is the main event, is the ta-ta moment of the menstrual cycle, and the pill prevents that. So That's a really important one. And we can think about those hormones are basically flatlined. They're not ebbing and flowing in the way that they naturally would. So when we think about cycle irregularities, let's just have a reminder that what we consider to be a healthy adult cycle is anywhere between 21 and 29 days. Okay. And this is so that you begin to get into your pattern of what that is. Teens have a longer cycle because they have a longer follicular cycle. There's more of that building because those follicles are kind of vying for position and they're pumping out a lot of estrogen. So they can be sort of 32 days and generally a healthy teen cycle can be anything from 21 days up to 45, and they will vary within that as they get going. So when there is what we call amenorrhea, which means the absence of periods in teens, let's go through what the checklist should be. Does that all make sense so far? Any questions?
Yes, it does. So one thing that stood out to me when you said 21 days,
yes,
I think most mums would think, oh, they're having periods very often. Like it's that 21 days goes quite quickly.
But now do you know why? Without wanting to sound...
Remind me.
Okay. So 21 days it's because they're probably not ovulating. So they're not producing progesterone.
Right.
So they're having that longer follicular phase.
Yes.
And and if they're 21 days, so they're not having, or they're having a very short luteal phase, or they're not having a luteal phase, so they're not ovulating. So that's why. So that's very commonly why they jump around all over the place.
But you could think, oh, that doesn't seem right. But again, relax, wait, give it a while.
You need to give it at least 2 years.
At least 2 years.
Jump in at sort of like in year one, post-menarche, and say these are wrong. Because again, it's like, what is that? In every textbook, and this maybe sounds, well, it's 1 day difference. Does it really make a difference? But every graph that you see, every textbook you see, a menstrual cycle is 28 days. Well, in actual fact, and I learned this from the wonderful Dr. Nikki Kay, is that actually, in truth, the average menstrual cycle is 29 days.
Right.
But for ease of maths, because you can divide 28 into an even number, you can say, oh, well, you ovulate on, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's about establishing that rhythm for that individual.
Yeah,
woman.
and it's very individual.
Yeah. So the key thing, and I love your analogy that you used in the last episode of the orchestra, and learning how to blend and learning how to listen to the conductor, who is the pituitary, and it needs a lot of practice. The other analogy that I've used and may be helpful for mums listening to understand, when your daughter has her first period with that celebration, it's like her learning to drive a car. It's exactly the same as when you sit in that passenger seat for the first time. She is going to stall down the road. She is going to nearly drive into the lady walking along the pavement. It is going to take a lot of practice of getting in and out of the car and experiencing different things within her environment, the time of day, the weather, the lighting, all of that can be translated to the human body in terms of those are all the signals that the brain is sensing about whether it is still safe to go through this process. So that is why, and it is a learned pattern. So they will jump around all over the place to start with. Yeah?
Great. Yep. Thank you.
Brilliant. So if there then is the absence of periods that become more, if the young woman has started her period 2 years ago, and then now she's gone 6 months without having a period. These are the most common reasons of what we need to. First of all, the most obvious one is, could she be pregnant? Amazingly, that's overlooked quite a lot. And then we think about, again, through a more holistic lens, are what I would call the roadblocks to ovulatory cycles. So, and it's our job, and we are far better placed through this lens, this more holistic lens, to be thinking about removing those roadblocks rather than just trying to, quote, regulate the cycle through the pill. So we want to be thinking about, is there a medical condition that hasn't been uncovered? So a very common one might be celiac disease. So it's sort of an inflammatory condition related to the GI tract, to the gut. But if there is any significant unrelenting inflammation that hasn't been identified, then on a fundamental level, that's sending messages to the brain called cytokines saying there's a danger response. So that could be enough to prevent menstrual cycles if there's any ongoing aberrant inflammatory response. They would also you'd want to check whether there is something called, most commonly is benign, but a benign tumor on the pituitary gland, which causes high prolactin. That is the hormone that we release when we're lactating. Mm-hmm. But actually, if there is a benign tumor on the pituitary that's pushing on the pituitary, it can release high prolactin, and that will prevent ovulation, which is why when we're breastfeeding, you can't become pregnant as well. Yeah, very unlikely. And there can be genetic reasons. It's not overly common, but there's a genetic condition called Turner syndrome, and that can be a reason that would need to be done through your GP. Mm-hmm. Severe nutritional deficiencies. So either specific nutrients. So if you're chronically anemic, if you're chronically low in vitamin D, zinc, any of the essential fatty acids, but also under that umbrella, if you're chronically undernourished, so disordered eating, that's a massive signal to the brain, we're not safe, we're not getting a consistent level of nutrition here, then the brain will shut down. So, and then the two most common areas that we want to be thinking about when there is an absence of periods is something called hypothalamic amenorrhea. So hypothalamic is the brain, the hypothalamus is the brain, and amenorrhea, we've just learned, means the absence of period. So this means it's brain-based. It basically means the brain is saying, no, thank you, this is not a safe environment. And most commonly, it's due to being undernutrition, being undernourished, and combined quite often with over-exercise or just pure over-exercise. So this is common in young girls that do gymnastics, do sort of, athletics. And I'm absolutely not anti any of those. But again, like anything in life, there is a balance, and that uses up significant amount of energy, and the brain is just sensing that there is not enough energy to go around. So it will dial down and turn off this very energy demanding process.
So in that instance, would you recommend, if there's a girl, I have a friend whose daughter's extremely sporty, is in every A team, dances 5 times a week, does she need to eat more what would, because obviously she wouldn't want to give that up. What would be your advice?
Yeah, you really want to be, again, it does depend on their frame, but if someone is doing that level of activity to that degree every day, then really they're wanting to be consuming 2,000, 2,400 calories a day. And they really need to be ensuring that they're getting sufficient whole grain carbohydrate as well, because that's fueling giving them glucose and storing their glycogen stores.
Right. So not be on a low carb diet.
Absolutely, definitely not being on a low carb diet.
Right.
That's
useful.
Yeah. So that's the one big area. And then the second area is when there's high androgens. So we spoke in the first episode of this series about the awakening of the adrenal glands, adrenarche, which is high androgens. And so these are male-like hormones. And that when those high androgens aren't naturally suppressed and the beginning of the menstrual cycle, estrogen starts to dampen that down. One mechanism, the way it does that is that estrogen helps to increase the levels of what is called sex hormone binding globulins. And sex hormone binding globulins are like little taxis that hormones jump into to be able to travel around the body. Okay, because they're predominantly, our sex hormones are made of fat. They're steroids. They're made of fat, cholesterol. And so the blood is mainly aqueous. It's made of water. So we don't have just hormones floating around free in blood. They jump into these little taxis, which are called sex hormone binding globulins. And estrogen, when we start to produce estrogen, helps the production of more of these taxis to go out onto the ranks. So that they preferentially go after androgens. So the beginning of the menstrual cycle helps just to counterbalance that adrenarche system. And then the second component is when we start to ovulate, progesterone also is really anti-andronergic. So it helps to calm down those androgens as well. So persistently high levels of androgens is another reason for preventing of having amenorrhea. Okay. So the most common reason at this age the most common diagnosis that's given when we have high androgens is PCOS. Okay, so, and this is really important. So PCOS is a condition of androgen excess and irregular periods when all other causes of that androgen excess have been ruled out. Okay, so, and there can be a number, and one in particular that needs mentioning that I would suggest that every girl that is being suggested that is given this diagnosis is something called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and this can occur in 1 in 100 women, young girls, and it's basically when the adrenals, it's a genetic reason, just basically keep pumping out high levels of those androgens. Okay, and the hypothalamic amenorrhea is a lack of periods or irregular periods that's predominantly caused by negative energy balance. So does that make sense?
Yep.
So it might be important now to let's kind of compare and contrast what that might look like in terms of symptomology, because I think that can be helpful.
Yeah.
So PCOS, there can be absent periods, or there can be long, or there can be short cycles, versus with hypothalamic amenorrhea, generally there's just completely absent periods.
Okay.
So with PCOS, they tend to be more irregular. So you can go maybe 45 days and then have a period. And then you might go another 45 days and then you might go 21 days. But with hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's just this constant not having a cycle, not having a period. Okay. With PCOS, again, to remind us, PCOS is a condition of high androgens that's is diagnosed either clinically, i.e. we look at the symptoms. So this would be jawline acne, sort of hirsutism, so facial hair, and not just a dusting, but sort of like quite thick sort of facial hair, which is obviously very distressing for women. Whereas hypothalamic amenorrhea is more that sort of anorexia type, more downy type hair that you might see, rather than it being that sort of much more coarser, thicker hair of PCOS. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. So are you saying that if a girl is presented with no periods at all,
Yeah.
it's unlikely to be PCOS. But if a girl, let me
Nearly.
get this. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
So-
let's explain it again, because if I'm not understanding
let's
it.
explain
Yeah.
So PCOS, first off, it's a condition of high androgens. So we need to, then that needs to be present.
So that has to be present.
That has to be
because
present.
You can't have PCOS without high androgens.
Correct. So PCOS is a condition that has high androgens. So the high androgens can either be diagnosed either by observing the woman clinically, and those clinical signs are jawline acne. It's quite
And it's obvious, is it, that it's
Jawline
very around the jawline
Yes.
rather than all over?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And facial hair, much coarser, sort of denser facial hair is the kind of, so that's the clinical diagnosis, or the presence of high androgens, so high testosterone or high DHEAS on a blood test. So you can,
and you'd need a blood test.
Yeah. But you can diagnose the high, if they're displaying those clinical signs, then those are clinical signs of PCOS.
Can you have PCOS without those visible clinical signs?
So actually, I think what would be helpful is, because this has changed, so the diagnostic criteria for PCOS is that it requires two of the following. So clinical or biochemical, i.e. clinical we've just described, or a blood test of hyperandrogens, right?
Yep.
The second, so you need 2 out of the 3. The second is ovulatory dysfunction, so irregular cycles. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily, that when it says ovulatory dysfunction, that doesn't mean a complete absence. It can be that irregularity. And then the third is polycystic ovaries on ultrasound. Okay, so you need 2 out of the 3. Now, brilliantly, last year, these guidelines were revised, and very especially for adults, where the recommendations are, I quote, "We do not recommend ultrasound as the diagnosis in adolescence," and an adolescence is 18 and under, because there is too much of an overlap with the normal physiology of what is happening. Because when we go back to what we talked about in the last session, if we ultrasound every single teen girl as that cycle is getting going, what do we see? We see all of those follicles releasing lots of estrogen. They're all doing what they're told. That FSH is being, the conductor is saying, come on, follicles, get going. We want you to start developing, start growing. And so every teen girl will have a number of follicles that's kind of throwing their hat into the ring to be the chosen one, to be the dominant follicle. So this is the normal physiology of what is happening in adolescence. So, and you compare this with, you've also got the flip side of, you've got that, those adrenals have awakened. So you could quite easily mistake those symptoms of high androgens. And then if you use the second diagnosis, that third diagnostic criteria of you run an ultrasound, that is why so many young women walk out of a doctor's office with a diagnosis of PCOS. So if we dial that back and say, okay, so they basically, under 18, we are looking for, there has to be clinical or blood test results of high androgens, and then there has to be ovulatory dysfunction. Okay. And then we also have to rule out that all other areas have been ruled out, and for that. And that could be, they could have thyroid disease, there could be hypothyroidism, there could be high prolactin. And actually, quite commonly, there's a bit of a dance between thyroid and prolactin. So if somebody has got an issue with their thyroid, it can actually push up their prolactin levels. So if you address the hypothyroidism, it might bring down the prolactin levels. So this is just to rule out other reasons of high androgens. The congenital adrenal hyperplasia, so that's the blood test that the doctor would do. And then the other area is that hopefully not, but if the young woman has been put on the pill, and if they have been put on there's a certain group of pills that we'll go over in great detail, but something like Yasmin or Lucet or Yacella, these are all types of pill that actually suppress androgens, suppress those tablets. But if they then come off that, very commonly there can be a surge of that androgen production. So all of those have got to be ruled out. So to sort of dial that back, we need to be, if they've got irregular cycles and if they're showing signs and symptoms of those high androgens, we first of all need to rule out that thyroid isn't involved, there's not high prolactin, they haven't just come off the pill, and the adrenals aren't involved, then we can move forward. I know it's quite complicated, but hopefully.
Well, I have my own story of a PCOS misdiagnosis.
Go on, share that with me.
Do you want me to share it?
Please do.
Okay. Well, so I went on the pill age 19.
Okay.
To quote regulate my hormones.
Classic.
And I had painful periods, but they probably weren't abnormally painful. I came off the pill when I was about 30, 31. Probably 30.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay. And then I got married and, I'll have a baby. Where's the baby? And sort of, I don't know, maybe 6 to 9 months had passed and nothing was happening. So being impatient and not understanding that my cycle was sort of getting back into its flow.
Yeah.
Took myself off to a very prestigious private hospital in London where they do women's health and saw a very senior gynecologist.
Okay.
I had no visible signs of androgen excess. I had nothing. I'd never even heard of PCOS. So they did an ultrasound and I imagine
that this was happening.
And that my follicles were all going, oh, me,
yeah,
hello, I'm back. And they went, oh, you've got PCOS.
Outrageous.
Yeah. So then they put me on medication to help me get pregnant. Clomid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that all ended badly. I did get pregnant, but it ended badly.
Okay.
So then I just thought, I'm just ditching all of that. I don't even know if I had PCOS. When your instinct is just, that's not right.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem right. Anyway, it was all's well, it ends well. But that was, and I remember you talking about this in your lecture, and I was like, that is me, textbook me. And I was so wrongly diagnosed.
And so you were put on the pill at 19 and then you came off it,
I think it was
over
30.
a decade later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and you said before in our first episode, you started your periods at 15.
But I think 14.
Okay. So it had the symphony was beginning to get into a real rhythm.
Yes.
And then it was completely switched off.
Yes.
For a decade.
Yes.
And then what was being viewed on the ultrasound was that the conductor of the orchestra was tapping his baton, saying, okay, we're ready to go again, follicles. Mm-hmm. So the follicles were beginning to waken up.
Yeah.
And snapshot in time, you take a photo of that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't follow any of the criteria.
None.
Of you need to have 2 out of the, so you didn't have, you had irregular cycle. So So had your period started?
Yeah, my cycle was regular.
Okay, so that's that was a complete misdiagnosis because you weren't having irregular cycles,
acne, facial hair,
and you had no signs of androgens.
No.
So you only had 1 out of the possible 3 and you need 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any, sorry,
Yeah,
are there any stats on PCOS overdiagnosis or not? Or you just
know that
it's
these guidelines were only, though that was only changed last year.
Very recently.
Yeah, just the back end of middle of 2023.
Yes, I remember Nikki Kay talking about it.
And that is, that's a wonderful step forward for womankind.
Yeah.
Because hopefully it will begin to alleviate this just shameful sort of overdiagnosis of a label that is then then we see this a lot, don't we? That actually then it's kind of built into our psyche that we then we become that label.
Yes. And
we see that with a whole number of diagnoses around women's health. Yeah, and it can be very disempowering and very
yes.
Yeah.
And from a sort of neuroscience point of view, not that I'm a neuroscientist.
It's something you've been hiding from.
Yes, well, in my spare time, your brain believes what you tell it.
Yes.
And then it will start actually doing the things that you're telling it. So if you think you're ill, for example, so you know how I remember seeing a comedian years ago and he started talking about his, when he had the snip.
Oh, yeah.
And a guy in the audience fainted, keeled over, and then 2 other people keeled over straight after. And I thought, holy God, we're being attacked. Someone's just pumped some sarin gas in here or something. So that's the way my brain works.
Not dramatic
and
at all.
Not at all. And I said to Clive, my husband, we need to get out. They're poisoning us. And he went, nah, it's because he was talking about the snip. And then one person faints and then it's sort of contagious because you think, oh God, and it is, if you think you're ill, you can actually feel those symptoms.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The brain's so powerful.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, these are, and also the terminology, the vernacular, they're really sort of just very unpleasant terms when we think like premature ovarian insufficiency.
Yeah.
Polycystic ovary syndrome.
If you're 14.
I mean, they're not cysts, they're follicles. So they're baby follicles. They're not, the terminology is not even right. They're baby follicles.
You hear the word cyst
so
and you
they're
think
not cysts at all.
You pretty much go straight to cancer in your head.
They're not cysts. As I said, ovarian insufficiency. So it is, these are very, very powerful words.
Yeah, especially for a young teen and then an anxious mother.
Yeah.
So mums listening, if you think maybe your daughter has PCOS or your daughter's on TikTok a lot and self-diagnosing, which I think happens a lot.
So go back, pause, listen to those 3 areas that, got to be, they've got irregular periods. You can't, the ultrasound diagnosis is completely not fit for purpose for 18 and under. So they need to have the irregular periods and signs of androgen either clinically or on a blood test.
Great.
Yeah. So if then you have a daughter that has actually been diagnosed properly, what can we do? Because again, quite commonly then what is prescribed is metformin, because insulin resistance, it is not a cause of PCOS. It is common to run alongside with a diagnosis of PCOS. And this is why I don't understand why when a diagnosis of PCOS is given, immediately the treatment is to put someone on metformin, which without actually looking to see, do they have insulin resistance? Let's look at their fasting insulin. Let's look at their, or let's do an oral glucose tolerance test. So that would be the first thing to do. But holistically, again, through our lens, there is so much that we can do within the heterogeneous, i.e. there are many different types of PCOS that we can support. So the first thing is diet. I'm a nutritional therapist, so of course I'm going to approach it through diet. So a whole food plan, and I use the term food plan rather than diet because we really don't want to be using that word We want to avoid that. And we want to be focusing on foods that are as close to their natural evolution as possible. So that's what I mean by whole food. So it's good levels of protein. And interesting enough, today when we were having our lunch break, I sat next to a table of probably a group of young women in their 20s all talking about how much protein they were having. So there's some awareness of that.
Right.
So that was, managed to not butt in. So high protein. So so protein is animal protein, meat, fish. Eggs are a fantastic source of protein. Just whip up an omelette, fantastic. Lots of fiber, so getting from plants, so whole grains, brown rice, brown pasta. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like brown pasta, so I can live with a bit of white pasta, but try to have the wild rice or whole grain basmati rice. Cooking it in a bit of stock actually is really, it makes it more tasty and maybe doesn't taste quite so worthy. And that's actually a really nice way to incorporate that. When I say low sugar, I mean just being mindful. Again, you don't want to create this as a diet, but it's just thinking about where those maybe excess sugars come in. And especially this is very classic at this age. When we think back to when our girls were that sort of 13, 14, when they start to come into town on their own with their girlfriends and they go and sit in Starbucks, Costa, and they're taking in a lot and they're ordering these frappuccinos. And it's just thinking where there's more of this excess sugar that is coming in without being like creating disordered kind of over-parenting, sort of parachute parenting. It is, I totally understand it is a fine line. And hydration sounds really simple, but just ensuring they go out the door with a water bottle, and that will really help even just balance sugar cravings. Because with irregular periods, then actually that can also cause more cravings because those hormones are not regulated. And so just ensuring that you're hydrated actually can help to temper that. So that's a real
great.
Regular exercise doesn't need to be excessive, but just getting out, moving. Even just, there was a big difference I noticed with my daughter when she moved from school and then she went to a sixth form college, and she was walking back and forth on the train and that just makes such a difference, because your biggest muscles are at your quads, and so that's helping to dispose of that glucose as well. So movement is really important. And then in terms of supplements, the two big ones that I would think about if you're confident is a diagnosis of PCOS, number one is zinc. So the dose. And again, reminding there's very, very little zinc in plant foods. And a lot of this age group are really gravitating towards veganism. So you want to be taking 30 grams with your largest meal, and zinc helps to increase progesterone and decrease androgens. And that's what we'd want to do in PCOS. Okay, so zinc. And then it's actually a form of a bean nutrient called myo-inositol. And myo-inositol is like an intracellular, i.e. inside of the cell. It's like a second messenger. And it's a second messenger, especially for FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. So it's kind of like a security blanket. It's like the Hawkeye, and also for insulin. So it facilitates a more normal response to insulin and thereby improves insulin sensitivity. So myo-inositol, and the dose is 4 grams a day, and take it in divided doses. So it's easier to take it in a powdered form rather than taking those.
Sounds quite a lot.
Yeah. So you need to go quite high with this. So it comes in a powder.
Right. And that's easily found. It's not one of those ones.
No. You can find that.
You can't get here.
Yeah, you can easily find that.
And you mentioned zinc earlier, and you said 30 grams. Do you mean milligrams?
30, yes.
Yes.
Yes,
I thought we'd
thank
just
you.
clarify.
30 milligrams.
Someone's trying
Well
to get
done.
30 grams
Well
of
done.
zinc.
Thank you. 30 milligrams.
And we did mention this in the previous episode, but may not have listened or remember. Zinc bisglycinate is a nice
that's a nice
form, and have it with dinner, a big meal, because otherwise it can make you feel sick.
Yes.
Yeah. And my teenage son and daughter, eldest daughter, both take it with dinner, 30 milligrams. They don't feel sick.
They would feel sick if they took 30 grams.
They would feel really ill. So I thought we'll just...
So yes. Sorry, that's being a bit flippant here. But it's absolutely, thank you for picking me up on that.
And inositol you can get from...
Yes, so you can
get,
practitioners. You can get it through Amrita Nutrition, or someone you can get it through someone like the Supplement Hub.
Great,
and really reputable brands.
Yeah.
There is a place in adult women to use what we call cyclical progesterone. So this is body identical progesterone that is used in HRT. So this is, and you can use it in PCOS. You can use this cyclically. So you can use it 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Because if we remember what progesterone does, natural progesterone, is it calms down luteinizing hormone, and PCOS is a condition of high luteinizing hormone. So we need that ovulation, we need that progesterone to kind of calm that down. So there is a really fantastic paper that was being written by Professor Geraldine Pryor and Lara Bryden, who is a wonderful naturopathic physician. And they wrote a paper where using cyclical progesterone in PCOS to re-regulate the cycle. And you cannot do this with the pill because the pill doesn't contain progesterone. It contains a progestin. So the pill would not work and be advantageous in this way. But I would be hesitant to go straight in with cyclical progesterone in a teen or a tween. Maybe if they're nudging more towards 18, 19, 20, then I would, and those other interventions hadn't kick-started things. But yeah, you don't need to go in with the big guns first off.
And I guess with a teen, you wouldn't going on the pill route or the metformin route. You would try looking at diet, nutrition, lifestyle. So those first
elements are working on all of those aspects. To support the acne, to try to regulate the cycle, etc. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then we move into the other most common reason, which is hypothalamic amenorrhea. So this is brain-based. So it's a reaction from the brain that is it's reacting to a stressor, and it is sensing, the hypothalamus is sensing danger, so it's down-regulating. And the most common reason for that is inadequate calories. So too few calories basically shuts down luteinizing hormone. And if you see luteinizing hormone, so LH on a blood chemistry that's very low, so in teenagers, you would expect to see luteinizing hormone sort of 2, 3, 4 is the measurement. If you see it at 0 point something, then, or sort of 1 under 1, then this is a very good surrogate marker that there is not enough carbohydrate intake. Yeah. Similarly, if there's a very low, what's called T3, that's the active thyroid hormone, don't shoot the messenger. And practitioners out there, don't say, "Oh, we need to treat the thyroid." It's shooting the messenger. It's actually look further up. It's the body is sensing danger and it's down regulating. So why is that conversion low? So those are two very good markers that there's not enough nutrition, and very specifically with the very low T3, in that it's not enough carbohydrate intake. So yeah. And then other reasons, again, over exercise. So, and we see this with professional athletes. And actually, there was a really interesting interview with the women's football squad, the Olympic football squad, that was talking about sort of how they really, really feel in their power. They get, it's a superpower. If they have a match when they are just pre-ovulation. It's like giving them, there's no test for that in terms of, you can't rule them off the pitch, but it is a superpower. So if you can harness that, then that's phenomenal. And then mental and emotional stress. So sexual trauma, this is a big reason, and mental trauma. This is another big reason why there would be a shutdown. Now this is something why it's also really important to take time and listen and create a safe space, because, and again, sadly, the NHS sadly is just not set up to do that, and to be able to hear, it's a 10-minute appointment, that it could well be that this young girl has had a bad experience at uni, going to uni, or has felt overwhelmed, or has been put in a situation she hasn't felt comfortable with. And this can be enough of a trigger, or the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, that actually shuts down those messages. So it is this sort of more holistic lens that we view health through. We need to sort of take all that on board around. So, and I think that is a much more respectful way to frame this than, oh yes, this is in your head.
Yeah.
It is in your head. Hypothalamic amenorrhea is absolutely brain-based. It is in your head. But there's a reason why it's in her head. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I really hate that it's in your head.
I loathe it. Drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nutrients and support for hypothalamic amenorrhea, sort of nutrition is really important. So adequate energy increase. Now, if there is disordered eating, absolutely, we are not going to be able to say you need to eat 2,500 calories. I mean, that is just going to just going to completely turn off. So, and I say this with the greatest of respect, and I fell foul to this early on in my career, is that nutritional therapists are not well placed to be able to deal with disordered eating. They need to be under the guidance of a psychologist. They need all of that support before they can talk about eating of quality food. And so the mental and emotional component of that needs to be supported, and then they need these young women need a team of people around. But taking her off to see a nutritional therapist who isn't professionally trained in anorexia, bulimia is not actually the timing isn't right, because they're not in the right place to be able to hold that woman. Yeah.
But there are nutritional therapists who are trained.
There are nutritional therapists who have gone on to do that specific training.
Yeah, so absolutely. You can look for that
totally
qualification.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are, and I refer to them myself all the time. And yeah, absolutely. Yes. Now, because this is brain-based, the use of something like magnesium glycinate, which helps to the hypothalamus, helps to attenuate there are certain receptors they're called NDMA receptors, which are very responsive to cortisol and adrenaline. And it helps to, and magnesium glycinate helps to, if you like, just sort of calm the receptiveness of those. So that can be very calming to that hypothalamic axis. And then sort of nice herbal anti-analytics, things like ashwagandha and rhodiola, and you will find those in some nice herbal, some nice blends that are suitable for this age group. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is thinking about the gut and thinking about digestion, because a lot of I've heard so many of my daughter's friends, just not that I'm listening at the door, promise you, but just sort of talk very openly about how often they feel bloated and have gut issues, and this can very, very easily flip into disordered eating as well, and over-diagnosis of SIBO or food intolerances, and ruling out of all of these, not just foods, but ruling out of entire food groups. So we have to be really careful about that. So actually just supporting their digestive process and thinking about talking to them about chewing their food, sitting, eating at a table, not with their legs crossed, and engaging the nervous system to expect food. Possibly something like lactose intolerance is actually quite common. And so actually having a simple test for that, which because lactose is a sugar, which is, if it isn't digested, if you're missing the enzyme to break that sugar down, it sits in the gut and it basically ferments and it causes bloating and horrible sort of flatulence and burping and belching. And so actually just having a simple lactose test to see whether you've got the enzyme to break that down is very important. So working on the digestive system as well as the gut microbiome is also really important to help improve their digestive process. And allow 6 months of proper intake of food before you you can't expect to be eating 2,000 calories for a month and then expect your cycle to kick back in. This can take 6 months.
Yeah, which makes sense.
So again, it's time. It makes sense. The brain's doing its job. It's like, okay, you were in danger.
Yeah.
You're okay. There's food coming
again.
in now, but I don't think I really trust you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always ask questions about pooing, but a lot of teenage girls are also constipated.
Yes.
And does that have, because we excrete spent hormones.
Yeah.
So is that also an important thing for them, for their sort of general hormonal well-being?
I think at this age, it's definitely more important sort of as we get older. But for the purposes of this age, yes. I mean, it's a natural process. We should be having a bowel evacuation at least once a day, a properly formed bowel evacuation at least once a day, maybe twice. That's normal physiology. So the downside of not doing that, and it's reframing the question to the girl is that, are you constipated? They're going to say no. How often do you pass the stool? Well, if it's twice a week, then that's not okay. So that is absolutely going to cause bloating. It is going to also cause a recirculation of already ready to be packaged up hormones for elimination, but any other sort of toxin as well. So that is going to have an impact. But also it is then also going to change the community within the microbiome. So the microbiome is most densely populated in the large bowel, the large intestine, and the bacteria and the fungi and the viruses that reside there that form this beautiful community play a really important role in our hormone balancing, in our immune system, in terms of in the way that we feel emotionally. So there is going to be a knock-on effect across all of those other systems as well if someone's not eliminating properly. Yeah. So now can we talk about heavy periods?
Yes.
So what constitutes a heavy period? So if you are bleeding for more than 7 days, if you need to change your pad or your tampon like every hour for consecutive hours and days, that's heavy. And also if it's accompanied by pain that's not relieved by ibuprofen and anti-inflammatories. And there's no problem in taking ibuprofen for a couple of days you don't need to be a martyr.
Yeah.
It's very effective, and going back to, again, session 1, it's quite common for periods to be more painful and heavier and more, let's kind of crampy initially, because it's all estrogen led, right? And when with the cars bunny hopping down the road, we're learning the ropes. So that is, and there's not very much progesterone coming in to lighten the period. Yeah. So, and then similarly, they're also getting used to that process of that uterine lining shedding that kind of carpet, that shag pile carpet, is the action of that is the release of what are called prostaglandins, so chemical messengers that ibuprofen and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories work on. Okay, so that's why women are experiencing that pain. So the reason for these painful periods can be, again, if they're not ovulating, because there's no progesterone to lighten the flow. So it comes back to all of those things. We want to get that lovely ovulatory cycle working, all of the things that we spoke about in the last episode. Now, if they are sexually active, it is worth testing for STDs, because that absolutely needs treating, and that can cause painful, heavy flow. So that mustn't go untreated, and don't be a martyr. That needs to be done. Pelvic floor and the sort of chronic, there's a real connection between the nervous system. So this comes back to what you very intuitively were saying about the brain, Mel, in that we can, I also believe, I'm hesitating over this because this is not to disrespect any woman that has been given a diagnosis of endometriosis and adenomyosis, because they are highly debilitating conditions. But there is also a significant area that has been disregarded around that there is such an intrinsic link between the nervous system and the pelvic area, because the pelvic area is full of tiny nerve endings. So there can be this situation, very common situation, when young women are experiencing high levels of stress, like they're going through GCSEs and A levels, this can cause pelvic pain, and they may have some artificial lesion, endometrial lesions, which can just be natural physiology, rather than, and we don't need to just jump straight to that diagnosis. So we need to kind of just work through that nervous system connection as well. Okay. And then another very common area that needs to be thought about is histamine, because the uterus and all epithelial barriers. So we have these epithelial barriers in our skin. It's just like, an epithelial is a thin lining, pardon me, that lines the gut, that lines the uterus, that lines the lungs, and the sinuses. They have a very dense population of certain cells called mast cells. And these mast cells contain histamine and also something called heparin. So every month, or approximately every month, when the uterine lining is shed, it is full of mast cells, which can degranulate, or which do degranulate because they've been aggravated, and because it's an inflammatory process, and they release their contents. So you can get a surge of histamine.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is it is all interconnected. And histamine is also, interestingly enough, a neurotransmitter. We make histamine in the brain because it is actually an excitatory neurotransmitter. But in excess amount, like anything, I mean, we make it for very good reason, because it gives us, but in excess, it can lead to agitation, very like PMS type symptoms.
Okay,
so histamine is definitely something to think about. I think about when I'm thinking heavy periods, painful periods, and or sort of mood. But just for what we're talking about here, heavy period, I would be thinking about that.
Okay, so, and that is where you've got too much histamine circulating?
Well, for the purpose of what we're talking about here, it's really more that it's just a natural, a massive place of residence is of where mast cells reside, is in the uterine lining. So every 30, 40 days when that lining is shed, naturally, that process itself is inflammatory. It's releasing cytokines. Those cytokines have an affinity for mast cells. They dock onto mast cells like a key going into a lock. They unlock the mast cells. They go, yippee! Okay, so we've now got inflammatory cytokines, and now we've got a whole load of histamine and heparin. So that's going to make your period really heavy.
Right.
So a way to trial that is you can just see for a couple of cycles. Okay, just try taking an antihistamine.
I was going to say, is that a...
Yeah. And you're lovely, and there are natural antihistamines. So an omega-3, so Bare Biology, I would take the Life and Soul.
The liquid.
The liquid.
Yep.
So that provides 3 grams in one sitting. So omega-3s are what are called mast cell stabilizers. And it's a double whammy. So it helps to kind of stabilize that mast cell, so it prevents it from degranulating. But the other, you've got a double win with this. Well, actually a triple win. You've got also, it's a natural anti-inflammatory. So it works on exactly the same pathways as ibuprofen. It stops those COX or inhibits those prostaglandins, those inflammatory cytokines. And the DHA component of it has an affinity for the brain. So it helps with mood. So a teaspoon or tablespoon? Teaspoon of Life and Soul is going to be antihistaminergic, it's going to be anti-inflammatory, and it's going to be neuroprotective. So
sounds like a great product.
Sounds like a great product. There's any way you can get it.
Yeah, no idea. And if you're thinking there's no way my daughter would take a liquid, which would be the ideal in this scenario, my daughter
go on.
takes double the capsules. So the Life and Soul daily capsules. Yeah. She just takes 4 of those around that time, and then 2 a day, sort of in between periods.
And that's a great point that you bring up, because, and it's a question I get asked a lot, is that, so do they, because we don't want to be just handing out handfuls of supplements. We're bridging a gap. And so for this purpose, they don't need to take them all month long, but up the dose as they're coming to their bleed, and then go back down to the lower dose, because it's an essential fatty acid, i.e. we don't synthesize it. We don't make it ourselves, but an omega-3 is, and Bare Biology is my absolute go-to, is an essential for everybody because we don't make it. So, yeah, really important. And then the other element that can really help, and this can help with acne as well, but the histamine component is avoiding A1 dairy. So I'm specifically saying A1 dairy. So A1 is referring to the type of casein. So you've got your curds and whey. So A1 dairy, so you can get A2 dairy, or you can happily eat sheep's and goat's dairy. So we're not removing all dairy, it's just A1 dairy casein. And the reason is that A1 dairy contains a protein which is called a peptide, which has an opioid-like structure, so it can, and in some people, they're not able to break that protein down, and it has an affinity for mast cells, so it can aggravate histaminergic actions.
Okay.
So just removing A1 dairy. So
cow's milk.
So Jersey
There's
cows
an
is
A2
fine.
milk,
There's A2, and then you can get A2 milk.
Or if you want to eat cheese, just go for sheep or goat, but not cow.
Yeah.
So no cheddar, Parmesan out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could eat pecorino instead of Parmesan because that's sheep's milk.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm also a chef. No, I'm not.
Are you?
No.
Oh, just checking.
I know quite a lot about cheese. Well, my husband and my eldest daughter have casein allergies, but they love dairy.
There you go.
And just interestingly, I wonder if they would be okay, and I think also have histamine issues with sheep and goat. Or would you not? If you have a casein allergy, would you avoid all?
Well, yeah, casein is going to be in sheep and goats.
Yeah.
So for the purpose of what we're talking about here, it's the A1 casein. For what
so
we're talking
anyone
about
listening who's got casein allergy, don't get too excited and go off and eat a load of goat's cheese.
Yeah. We're talking about
this specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now the other thing to be thinking about is, this may sound counterintuitive, but checking for anemia, specifically iron, because an iron deficiency can make periods heavier.
Right, which sounds
counterintuitive, but I've seen this many, many times.
And why is that?
So I think it's because the body has a very, very clever mechanism of, it has a what's called a ferritin pool, and it has a very clever mechanism of keeping that pool, or the stores of ferritin within the right levels. So what's really important is to go to your doctor and ask them. There's nothing esoteric about these. These are just standard markers, but they need to have a full what's called blood chemistry. So you're looking at your red blood cell count, you're looking at what's called hemoglobin, you're looking at hematocrit, and then you want a full iron panel, which is looking at ferritin, transferrin saturation percentage, and all it's just to check that she's not anemic, because if she's anemic, then that's going to make periods even heavier.
Right.
So that needs to be addressed.
And would there be other obvious symptoms of anemia, like fatigue?
Very pale pallor, feeling breathless walking upstairs, if you can get them to walk upstairs. But feeling really overwhelmed, lackluster. Their hair suddenly looks really dull and lifeless. That sort of breathlessness and heavy bleeding. Bruising easily as well is also another sign of anemia. Now, a lot of those symptoms also can cross parallel with hypothyroidism. So this is why looking at the lens of holistically is really important, and not just jumping to a diagnosis. But that's really important. Zinc is, again, really, there's a study here of using zinc, same dose in the treatment of dysmenorrhea, so painful, heavy periods, and of course, omega-3. So this works on on reducing the prostaglandins, the inflammatory cytokines, and which then go on to produce what are called specialized pro-resolving mediators. So these are superpower anti-inflammatories, which are derivatives of the EPA and DHA, which convert naturally in the body. So there's a lot there that we can do through a diet lifestyle intervention, on top of maybe taking ibuprofen for a couple of days. All of those other components are really important.
And I know people worry about taking ibuprofen, my daughter included.
Yeah.
As long as you've got a full stomach, right? You want to have food in your stomach.
Yeah.
Occasional use, couple of times a month with your for your period.
Yes.
It makes your life a lot easier.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And sort of going back to the car analogy, reminding her that she's just becoming, with each cycle, she's going further down the road.
Yeah. And it won't be like this forever. Because
No.
I think there's also, especially when they're young, maybe they're 14 or 13 and it's just started and they've had a few.
Totally.
That thought of, have I got this for the next 40 years?
Yes.
Every month. So is daunting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So that's why sort of really understanding why that ovulatory cycle is so important is with these other tools to help to bridge the gap and alleviate those pain, and these dietary tweaks along the way is a more, I would say it's a much more sophisticated, bespoke approach where you're hearing them, you're meeting them where they are and helping you, and we're helping to guide them on that journey, rather than saying, "Oh yes, that's awful. Yeah, we'll turn that off."
Yeah,
because that isn't a solution at all. You're just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah,
that's kind of what we're doing. So,
great.
With that,
what's next?
What's next is PMS.
PMS, lovely.
Yes. So with PMS, the thing that I think is going to be most helpful to explain about PMS is that there is a real intersection with the ovarian produced hormones, so the estrogen and the progesterone, and the neurotransmitters that are produced in the brain. In that, to make serotonin and dopamine, so serotonin is our feel-good reward neurotransmitter. Dopamine is all about drive and motivation. Okay, so with all of these neurotransmitters, it's a bell-shaped curve, isn't it? We want to sit in the middle where we want to feel happy, content, we want to have drive, we want to have ambition, but we don't want to have apathy and inertia.
But we don't want to be stressed out,
and we don't want
adrenaline.
Exactly. We don't want mania.
Yeah.
So it's a happy medium. So the reason that there is this interplay is that estrogen and progesterone, but together with foundational nutrients like vitamin D, omega-3 and zinc, and your B12s, well, all of your B vitamins, are needed in the synthesis of our neurotransmitters. So the making of our neurotransmitters. And also, importantly, in the removal of those neurotransmitters. So, as an example, estrogen is involved in making serotonin, but also it's involved there's a little enzyme which helps to remove estrogen from the system when it's done its job. So if there is too much or too little of that estrogen, it will impact that, and you can then have these neurological symptoms. Okay. So similarly, we also want to make sure that we are thinking about differential diagnoses of, have we ruled out anemia, rather than saying, oh, it's your hormones, you've got PMS. So fatigue, dizziness, racing heartbeat, anxiety, because the body is basically craving oxygen. So you get the heart rate goes up to try and get more oxygen. Easy bruising, I've said that, sort of brittle nails. So those are symptoms of anemia. But you also want to be ruling out disordered eating, hypothyroidism. You want to check that not, all of those are not in the picture. And also talking about substance abuse, that conversation has to be had in terms of these mood symptoms. And of course, have they been on the oral contraceptive pill for a period of time? Because we know by the study that we showed last week that that can have an impact. So the first thing that I'd want to cover off with PMS is, have they got any dysregulation of blood sugar? Because symptoms of blood sugar that spikes and then plummets is sweating, feeling shaky, anxiety, inability to stay asleep, or they can't fall asleep, anxiety, depression, low mood, hair thinning. So does that not all sound like oh, it's your hormones. Well, actually, if we stabilize your blood sugar, and a classic sign at this age is if they say they're not hungry or they feel sick, they don't want to eat breakfast, that's a classic sign of dysglycemia. So having some kind of protein in the morning to actually that will actually help to level out their blood sugar. But if they're walking out the door feeling sick and anxious, then and thinking that that's PMS, then we're barking up the wrong tree. So that's definitely something that we want to think about. And then the estrogen component is also important. So estrogen helps to it increases an enzyme that is needed to take tryptophan, which is an amino acid that we get from protein food, and convert it into serotonin. And then estrogen also decreases the enzyme that actually removes serotonin from the receptor. So this is why when in the second half of the cycle, when estrogen drops, we can experience that lower mood. Okay. Now, interesting enough, the estrogen, the ethinyl estradiol that's in the pill does not have this impact at all. It doesn't help the neurotransmitter synthesis at all. And this is why it has such a massive impact neurologically as well.
I was going to ask you that because when you said estrogen helps you make serotonin.
Yes.
If you're on the pill, you have no estrogen.
Well, you do. You have ethinyl estradiol, but it's the brain doesn't. It doesn't kind of. It's not working. It doesn't recognize it in the same way. So it's not. We think about when we're making these neurotransmitters, it's like making a recipe. You're adding in all of these ingredients. It's not the same.
No.
It doesn't make up that. It doesn't.
It's a bit like when you make a gluten-free cake.
Yeah.
And rice flour. It's just not the same as wheat flour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have the gluten.
Exactly. So it doesn't work as well.
No.
Chia egg is quite good.
Chia egg.
Yeah. Mixing chia seeds
when you
and
make
water.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do a whole episode on chia eggs. Yes. Understood. So and a lot of girls report feeling incredibly depressed on the pill, which is also, I know we're going to cover the pill separately.
Yeah, but that's
that
fine.
Also why that could be why. Okay.
And then one other component is that when serotonin levels are lower, so if we're not making the right levels of serotonin, actually this triggers an insulin surge.
Right.
And that triggers cravings.
Crikey. Okay.
I know.
That makes sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, because you think, why am I suddenly craving a biscuit boost?
Yeah. And that happens in the second half of the cycle more commonly. So, if we're not, that's why we need, and get another reason, so there is such a connection between our ovarian hormone production and our neurochemistry. It's fascinating, hey?
So interesting.
And I alluded to this, but just to be also clear, I also talked about histamine, that we make histamine in the brain as a neurotransmitter. So at times in the menstrual cycle where estrogen is in ascendant, so around day 14, where all those follicles are pumping out estrogen, and then right at the end of the cycle where both estrogen and progesterone are on the downturn, but right at the end, there is just this slight uptick of estrogen over progesterone. Estrogen has an affinity for mast cells, and so it can actually aggravate mast cells to degranulate and release more histamine, and histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so that can lead to that kind of mania.
We want to kill people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that
men in the room are laughing nervously.
So it is a beautiful symphony that when we know this, then we can actually maybe take some omega-3 mid-cycle as well, just to help and those mast cells stabilise.
That's how I know my period's about to start, is because I, out of nowhere, feel intense rage and agitation.
There you go.
It's fun for everyone. No, I managed to keep a hold of it. But whereas my daughter will get very emotional and very tearful right before.
Yeah, so those hormones, they've plummeted.
They've all gone
and she's
down.
feeling a bit like the carpet's been pulled away from her. Yeah,
yeah,
which
and
it has essentially.
Everything's terrible.
Yeah,
so much doom and gloom. And I says, your period's about to start. Then the next day she goes, oh, you were right. And she feels totally different.
Yeah,
yeah.
So again, that's sort of another conversation around our society. If the menstrual cycle is accepted as a vital side of life, and there are these fluctuations, then shouldn't it be normal for in those days running up to a period, or just that actually it's the quieter, more introverted days that you stay at home, you work from home, that you're not set up to be engaging in the world and play and being out in your power as you are in the follicular phase.
Yeah,
it's a more powerful way to look at it.
Definitely. But there are a lot of women now who do that, don't they? They track their and then there are apps that tell you, okay, today's the day to do that.
I really
job
like
interview.
Daisy is a really nice one.
Okay.
DY.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it's actually a fertility app, but it's really great at tracking temperature and ovulatory cycles. It's a really nice one.
Yeah. I wish I'd known about that when I was young, because now it doesn't really work for me, does it, anymore? That whole I've lost my power.
You haven't lost your power.
No, I've got new power.
I've got
different power.
You've got new power.
But yeah, I think for young women, I think really, I mean, obviously it's not always possible.
Sure.
You know, wouldn't it be great if you could do your A level on the day you're about to ovulate?
I know. Yeah.
Instead of the day before your period starts.
I know.
But yeah, wouldn't that be great if you could work with it?
We'll put that to the exam board.
Yes.
In our lifetime.
Yeah.
So naturopathic treatments for this would ensure stable blood sugar, really important. And you just think about those symptoms of hypoglycemia. You feel shaky, you feel anxious, you start sweating, you feel wobbly, tearful. Okay, sit down and have a hard-boiled egg. I mean, but actually it is, or have some, just sit and have a couple of crackers and some cheese.
It's a typical teenager who might have had a can of Coke and a packet of wine gums
on their way back down. Yeah. So actually,
and then they feel terrible.
Yeah. Actually, pop into Pret and get a couple of boiled eggs or some. Yeah. Much better. Yeah. So stabilizing blood sugar, mast cell stabilizers. So omega-3, quercetin is also really lovely. Another lovely nutrient called Nigella, which quite often comes with quercetin in many formulas. Removing the A1 dairy. That's a really nice combination. So you're looking at balancing blood sugar, removing just that A1 dairy and those nutrients. Optimize vitamin D, because vitamin D is also involved in making all of those, making serotonin, making melatonin, making dopamine. So get vitamin D levels checked twice a year and supplement accordingly. Keep those at an optimal level. Check for anemias, and balancing and exercising, being out in nature, and good sleep hygiene. Really difficult in terms of that phone out of their bedrooms, which we have far less control over at this age. But at least ensuring that they are sleeping and that they are not nocturnal and then sort of staying in bed till midday. It's really important to calibrate that circadian rhythm. Yeah. Really, really important.
And ideally get some sunlight in the morning.
Yeah.
Rather than phone light.
Sunlight, even if it's just, so within 30 minutes of waking, that cortisol awakening response. So just taking them a cup of tea or whatever they're having, just sat on the step outside. Yeah. So they're getting exposure to that UV light through the cornea is really, really important.
Yeah.
It's really important. And this is a really fantastic study that I think I've shared with you before, but this was using sort of evaluation of omega-3 fatty acids with 124 women who were prescribed 2 grams of omega-3.
Mm-hmm.
And after 45 days, the severity of their depression, anxiety, lack of concentration, bloating were significantly lower in the group that took the omega-3.
Amazing.
So it is a completely holistic approach.
Yeah.
But this is the way forward to support these young women.
Yeah.
And I think that is the takeaway message, to support that.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much. On that note, you're mentioning vitamin D and testing your vitamin D levels.
Oh, yes.
People who listen to this who don't know who I am, and I don't, do a lot of product plugging, but we don't have sponsors. It's effectively sponsored by Bare Biology, which is the company I founded and I'm the CEO of, which we started off as a very specialist omega-3 brand because I love omega-3 so much because it's insanely brilliant at pretty much everything.
It is.
But we also have a vitamin D called Beam and Balance, which has no sugar in it. And we also have a vitamin D test. So for your omega-3 and vitamin D and your vitamin D test,
yep, you can
come to us.
You can come to Bare Biology, absolutely.
Yeah. And, well, we'll be doing more episodes. The next one's covering the pill.
Next one's covering the pill and acne. So we'll do those two. Yep. So
brilliant.
Those go hand in hand. So
there. Yes.
It's been such fun.
Thank you.
Such fun to talk about menstrual cycles, periods, women's health in general. So look, bring on the next one.
Bring it on. Thank you.